Welcome everyone. This is Jim Summers dialing in today from snowy New Jersey, and I'm joined here with fellow presenter Tim Harmon, who, as you may have seen in a press release recently joined RelayWare. I'm very excited to have Tim on board. We also have two other presenters calling in from different locations. We've got Chris Buchholz, who is RelayWare's very own Director of Content. Chris, are you there with us?
I sure am. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks for joining us. And we also have a surprise guest today, a partner of ours who we've worked with on a number of projects, CCI. And calling in from CCI today is Mr. Steve Kellum, who's at VP of Sales and Marketing. Steve, are you there?
Yes. Morning.
Good morning. And I know it's earlier for both of you, Chris and Steve, I believe dialing in from the West Coast. So thank you both very much for joining us today. So we're going to do intros in a moment here in a second, as the agenda you see in front of you says. But what we're going to walk through today is talking about how to motivate your channels and your partners in the era of the cloud. The big theme of today's webinar is really around how the cloud has changed the economics of partner management and channel management. And put some pressure on incentivization and how you incentivize your partners to do what you would like them to do, which is create more business for you. So we're going to talk about a little background on incentives, giving you some tips on how effectively you're doing that today, if you are currently doing that. What's the wrong way and the right way of managing incentive programs. And then we're going to give you some advice and some next steps towards the end, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Sound good? All right, good. So let's jump in, if we could, just give a little bit more background on each of our presenters today, if we could. And you can see there's myself. I am a Chief Marketing Officer with RelayWare, and I come from the mobile industry and also marketing automation with a company you may have heard of called Responsys. And Tim, why don't you introduce yourself as the newest member of our team here?
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks, Jim. Hi, everyone. So I'm Tim Harmon. I head up the customer success program here at RelayWare now, where I'm chartered to help companies in making their channel strategy, executing their channel strategy successfully, and in developing their channel roadmaps. And most recently, I came from Forrester Research, where I led the research agenda on channels for the last 6 years. Chris?
Well, I'm Chris Buchholz. Thanks, Tim. I'm the Director of Content Marketing here at RelayWare, and my past has been a little weird. I started out as a journalist and covered things related to the channel with Bar Business, among other publications. And then I moved over to these sort of roles covering the CRM space with Inside CRM and Forecasting Clouds, which is logos and I'm up there. My last gig was as the director of, my formal title was editor-in-chief at Sugar CRM, but I did an awful lot of things, including work with some folks in the channel on some marketing efforts and some content creation efforts. So that's my background. And Steve, welcome to the webinar yourself. Can you give us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I ran a successful IT company here in the North Bay of San Francisco for several years. It was a managed service company, and we sold that business a couple of years ago and ended up in this space, this very interesting space between the partners and the vendors. Previous to running the IT company, I also have experience in building out a channel. Over 8 years, built a channel from 0 partners to over 2,000 partners, and went through a lot of what our vendors go through. So I have experience on both sides of the table.
Well, great. Well, thank you all. And as you can see here, we have a very esteemed panelist, a group of panelists here, and thank you all for joining us. Like we did on the last webinar, what we like to do is we don't want this to be a sales pitch. We want this to be very informative and educational for all of you. And we're going to keep this interactive as well, so it won't be, we'll try not to keep this a very linear discussion today. But you may be wondering why companies who seem to be doing similar things between RelayWare and CCI would be joining forces. And to try to clarify this a little bit, this is a chart actually that comes from Forrester that lays out the channel management software landscape. And you can see in the channel management landscape, there's a number of different flavors and types of providers out there. And right in the middle here at the hub, you've got partner relationship management. And then you've got companies that are more focused around partner incentive program management. And when you look at the two companies, RelayWare really defines itself primarily as software, cloud-based software, to manage your channel ecosystem and all your channel providers and all the things that goes along with that. One of those elements, of course, is incentivization. So we do have incentivization as a module and a capability within our tooling, but where we see that there are very sophisticated requirements or companies that are really trying to go very deep into the strategy around motivation and incentivizing their partners, we turn to experts like CCI to do that as well. So we've worked on a number of projects and opportunities together, continue to do so. And I just wanted to clarify that, Tim. I'm not sure if you would add anything to that I maybe missed.
No, I think that's right. The PRM, and this actually came from something that I created when I was with Forrester. RelayWare represents PRM, which is the anchor or the core, I think, of the channel management system, with incentive programs being a specialization, a very important specialization, like you said, to a lot of companies.
Good. Any other comments, Steve, before we move off this, just to clarify what CCI does for the listeners?
Yeah, I think you guys nailed it. It really has been a symbiotic relationship, and the clients that we've worked with, I truly believe we've been able to come together and create a synergy there, and together create a more successful service. It's worked exceptionally well.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's jump right into it if we could, and sort of set the stage. Chris actually, Buchholz, authored the white paper on this topic. So if you haven't seen the white paper, I encourage you to read it and download it. We'll give you a link a little bit later on here to that. But the way Christy really set up the situation is really what's happening in and around our partners or partners in general in managing all of the various customers and the challenges they go through. Can you explain a little bit about the dynamic that really tees up incentivization?
Sure. And I think this is what makes incentivization even more important today than it's been in the past. You know this from your own personal life, is that the amount of attention you have to focus on any one thing is kind of finite. We've been able to make people more productive in various tasks, but we can't make them. We can't do things that give them the ability to pay attention to more stuff than they can already pay attention to. There's only so much time in the day, and there's only so much attention you can devote to things. So how do you get people's attention? Well, you get it you can get it in part through incentives, but your partners are being pulled by a lot of different elements. Of course, they've got to pay attention to their customers and their customers' needs. That's first and foremost. If they can't satisfy those customers, they don't exist as a company. But they're also competing have competition for that time from their vendors. They may work with multiple vendors in their same space. You may have competitors who are also also working with these same partners. So they're competing for the time that you're trying to get a hold of too, this valuable time of your partners, their attention, and that next step, which is getting them to go from paying attention to what you're saying to them to actually acting on it and carrying out an activity or a behavior that you need for them to carry out in order to become more loyal, better trained, just generating more revenue from the relationship between the two of you. And so how do you do that? Well, it's very hard to manage all that. It's very hard to manage that in that attention economy unless you have a complete view of what's going on, not just the things you're saying and the messages you're blasting out to them or talking to them about directly, but also the effects those messages have on them. And without knowing those effects, without having visibility into what's going on as a result of your efforts, you can't make adjustments to make your incentivization program better. And that's kind of the contest you're facing right now. You need for people to do things that you need them to do to make that relationship with them better and to make that relationship more lucrative. You also need to figure out a way to get past others who are doing the same thing at the same time.
Yeah, so this next chart, which I know you referenced in the white paper, talks about from CompTIA in their channel trend study, the number on average of vendor partners that are being managed. So there's obviously, it's not just your solution, it's also, as you said, the customers and the myriad others here. So they say on average, it's about 8, correct?
Right. And for a large number of partners in that 20% range. Those are companies that are fairly large and they're potentially very lucrative. They're facing the same sort of incentivization from 15 or more different partners, for instance, and it's 15 or more vendors. So it's a very challenging situation to cut through all that noise, to deliver the right incentives, to deliver the right message about what those incentives are.
Right.
So your reality is pretty intimidating, I think, if you look at it the way people have looked at it in the past in sort of a piecemeal way.
Yeah. So that's the situation. Obviously, you want to have them choose you, right? And you need to influence those partners to look at your solution first and to elevate you to that stature. But when you look at traditional sales incentives and the way people have historically looked at this, whether they're monetary incentives, things like spiffs or rebates or discounts, or whether they're more experiential, where there's trips or meals, or more emotional around things like points and gamification, right, and the contest of it. These things certainly have an impact, but they're seeming like they're having less of an impact in the context of the channel and partners. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact of the cloud, which again is sort of the theme we want to touch on here. And when you look at direct sales incentives, the impact historically that they're having is primarily at the point of decision. So there's much more of a monetary incentive at that inflection point when somebody's physically buying something. So you control those employees, those salespeople, and you can put those types of incentives, and they have that impact. But when you introduce the indirect sales model with a lot of different partners and a lot of different actors in it, this doesn't really work as effectively. So those traditional incentives have less of an impact at that decision because there's certain dynamics that are happening out there, right, Tim? The cloud has basically introduced a different type of channel economics and people, shopping differently than they used to shop, right? I know you've touched on this in some of your research even before coming here. And maybe you could explain some of that and what's going on there.
Yeah, so like Jim said, the cloud changes everything. I'm sure you all have felt the impact. I know, again, coming from the analyst ranks for the last 6 years, I know talking with customers that it's changed things pretty dramatically for them and continues to do so. For tech companies, changing their go-to-market as well, but it's also changing things for channel partners. And I wanted to share this with you. So this is data that we actually collected from channel partner companies in North America and Europe on their revenue mix. So how are they making money? What are they making money from? I'm not going to necessarily go through every single item. If you want to set up a call with me afterwards, feel free to do so. But I wanted to point out some of the highlights of what we identified that channel partners are doing in reaction to cloud computing. So right there at the top is product sales. And then, by the way, that's on-premise product sales, both hardware and software. And you can see that we captured those things that they're selling or reselling in orange, and those things that they're actually doing or providing as a value-added service in the blues. Right, so if you look at the top one, they're selling or reselling tech companies' products, and you can see that their amount of revenue, the percentage of revenue that they derive from that, is actually going down in a couple of years slightly. I'll come back to that in a second. I wanted to point out, a couple of other things. So where the red arrows are things that are really in decline for the next 2 years. One is professional services, and then the other one down towards the bottom is channel partners being a provider of cloud infrastructure services. And I'll talk to both of those real quick. So I think a couple of years ago, a lot of channel partners companies heard the siren song that they could sell, hosted storage or hosted computing pretty easily, and they could provide that themselves through utilizing some of the virtualization technology that's available on the market. And indeed, a lot of channel partner companies jumped into that market. What happened at the same time? A lot of the big tech companies jumped into that market too. So it's not just Amazon anymore. It's Microsoft, Google, and IBM as well. Mm-hmm. And, the channel partner companies just can't compete on a economies of scale basis with the big boys. So, I think they're getting out of the cloud infrastructure provisioning market. On the same time, you see them shifting in the greens to reselling cloud infrastructure services, going up pretty dramatically. And then that one about professional services decline, where's that being made up for? Well, in terms of providing their own managed services. So, professional services or project-based services going down, managed services where it's on an annual subscription, renewable basis going up for channel partners. So go ahead, and I want to tell a story here. I'll tell a story about my wife, even though she doesn't like me to use her in my stories. A couple of years ago, my wife wanted a high-end DSLR camera. So I didn't know a lot about high-end DSLR cameras. So she said, I'm going to go in and, spend some time in the camera store learning everything I can. And she did that, right? She went in and spent about an hour while I sat outside reading my books. And then she came out and, got in the car and got on her smartphone and ordered a DSLR camera from Amazon. And so what's the moral to that story? What happens to the camera store owner? Out of business. Not good. Does not portend very well for the tech industry channel partners either, because the same sort of thing that's happening in the B2C or consumer industries is happening in the B2B and the tech industries as well. And that there's a lot more transactions that cloud is enabling to be able to facilitated a lot more readily directly with the vendor or through an online marketplace. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to show you some of the data that backs this up, to show you that it's actually occurring in the tech channel as well. So again, this is Forrester data. You look at the left is on-premise software. On the right is SaaS or web-based, cloud-based software, and where customers are actually sourcing those two from, right? So you see the one on the left on-premise, about 3/4 coming directly from the vendor, and about almost 70% from a channel partner, and then 22% other. On the right, cloud-based software, now look, more of that's being transacted, directly with the vendor, 80%, and a lot less is being transacted through channel partners, and quite a bit more is being transacted through other. So go ahead and click through, Jim. I want to talk about other for a second. What is other? So again, some more Forrester data, but if you look at the third and the fourth, what's grown dramatically over the past 3 years is e-commerce and online application marketplaces. They're still relatively small as a preferred, sourcing medium for cloud-based software and solutions, but those numbers 3 years ago were 1% and 2%, right? So they're growing. They're growing at over 100% annually, and if they continue to grow that way, they're going to continue to carve out business away from your channel partners. Right? So 2 things to keep in mind here. One is you need to point your incentivization programs not just at the transaction or revenue performance of your channel partners, but of their performance in the entire customer journey. Marketing, education, support, service, right? So I'm not suggesting that you give up revenue as a metric entirely, revenue contribution, or point your incentivization programs towards, rewarding revenue contribution, but to broaden your spectrum to the entire customer journey and what other values that channel partners bring to your customers.
So instead of this blue box being where traditional incentives were targeted at, we're now saying you should be looking at measuring and incentivizing along the entire continuum here.
I do, yes.
That seems overwhelming to probably to a lot of folks on the phone, and that's where obviously we come in and CCI comes in to help out with that, to help that management. So we'll get to that.
I'm sorry, this is Stephen here, and I'll jump into that. And Tim, we totally are on the same page as organizations on this, and I have some slides later on down the road. But we're seeing large organizations move upwards to 70% of what their revenues or what their spends were on rewarding for the sale, and moving that into what Tim is calling the journey, and really creating a systematic approach to enable the partners to be successful. And it's behavior modification at its core, but it's for the right reasons, and it's helping the partners be successful. It's helping the vendors have a view into where hiccups are, and in truth, it's allowing the allocation of money into the most effective motivational areas.
So that's a great point, Steve. So historically, right, people have used things like you see on this slide here, MDF funds and those more monetary incentives. And, so when we look at whether or not an incentive program is working or not, or is as effective as you'd like it to be or as it once was, you got to look at the signs, the crop circles here. And Chris, you talk about these in the white paper here as these 3 signs you should be looking for. Can you elaborate on this a little bit more?
Yeah, sure can. So most marketing companies or most marketing organizations within companies have a budget for MDF funds. An awful lot of them find that they can't spend those funds, or they have a situation that pops up where they get funds that become available late in the quarter, which then they try to push out to their partners, which doesn't do the partners a lot of good because they are trying to get a return on those before the end of the quarter, and they've got 3 weeks to work with them, for instance. So the inability to allocate MDF funds is a pretty good indication that you don't have visibility into your incentives and what works with your partners. Once you get those funds out there with your channel partners, does it become a black hole? Is it a knowledge void? Is it a situation where you don't understand what effect those funds are having? If you can't understand the return on investment for those funds, you've got a problem. You've got to figure out what the results of that is. You need some visibility into what's going on. And finally, if you're not sure if you're having any impact on partner behavior, and what I mean by this is that you can't correlate, for instance, an uptick in training activities to anything you're doing with your incentive programs. You can't correlate an increase in revenues to what's going on. You have no A to B relationship that you can understand very clearly. You're sort of putting their funds out there on faith and hoping they result in something, but you can't quite say this led to that or this contributed to that. You're sort of taking it on as an article of faith that incentives are important, and something good happened or something bad happened, and thus those 2 things must go together in some way or another. That's really not enough to justify your expenditures on MDF and co-op spending.
So let's dig in for a second here and look at this chart to really drive home your first point around MDF and your point that it's sometimes difficult to allocate those monies.
Yeah, this is a very interesting slide. This is from PartnerPath, and there are various studies done on MDF and how effectively it's allocated by companies. But you can see here that only 27% of the companies that were surveyed in this managed to allocate all of their funds. They had 0% of their funds unspent. That means a big portion of the pie is having an issue with figuring out where to put their MDF funds. The big pile there, the big 40% pie, that's between 1 and 14%. That's a pretty significant number of vendor companies having a hard time figuring out where to put their money. The green one is terrifying. 15% of the companies that were polled, a quarter or more of their funds just can't find a place to go. They can't figure out where to spend this money. They've got money in the budget, but they can't spend it. Now, if you're running the company, that's terrifying because you realize that your marketing department and your channel programs manager are perhaps casting about in the dark. If you're one of those people running those programs, it's terrifying because it's a pretty good chance that your budget's going to get slashed. So none of this is good for anybody. It's not good for partners. It's not good for vendors. It's not good for individual people within the vendors themselves. And so there's got to be a better way of doing this than the way that most companies are doing it.
Yeah, and sorry, this is Stephen. I mean, let's just go right to the key is that if the dollars are allocated and they're not being used, it should translate into there are not enough sales. I mean, there's one reason to do all of this, right? and you capture mind share. That's great, and it's important. But the reality is we need the partners to sell. We need them to take market share. It's not a marketing development fund. It's a market development fund. It's for growth. And I totally agree with you, Chris. We run into this on a regular basis, and it goes from simply vendors not having scorecarded well their partners and not knowing who to allocate the funds to, or having a really tried and true system to dig a deep scorecarding to make sure they're spending on the right partners, to marketers who are dealing with the finance side of their organization, where they've got a quarterly spend, and 8 weeks into that quarterly spend, they actually get the budget, and they have to tell the partners to turn around and have wonderful business development fund plans in the next 24 hours. The good news is there's a lot of solutions for that. There are a lot of tools out there that can really help with that to help create that planning mechanism and help solve a lot of those problems, along with some really good guideline recommendations on how to manage that through those partners.
Will you go to the next slide here, Steve?
Oh, sure. So I think this ties into back to that slide for a second.
Okay.
Two things on this. I think that the keys are that that green section, the second level there, is we're seeing a lot of investment in the new partners with gross sales trajectory. And this ties very much into the cloud side of things. A lot of the key partners, a lot of the stars tomorrow maybe aren't from a sales volume, the stars today, but if the scorecarding is done really well and what makes up that partner is really identified, those characteristics are really well identified, you can really look at where do you invest those dollars. And even with the well-established partners with the track records, the dollars are really being allocated differently. And we're seeing tremendous efforts by organizations both in Tier 1 and Tier 2 to really look at where they're spending their dollars, who they're spending those dollars with, and how.
Right.
And maybe that next slide sort of goes through that a little bit. One of the things we've seen is a tremendous shift into truly discretionary spending. We've worked with Tier 1 organizations that have gone from 5 years ago, they were 95% co-op and 5% MDF. Today, they're at 70% co-op, 30% MDF, and their goal is to be 50-50 within the next 2 years. We've worked with large Tier 2s that are right there at the Tier 1 level that have literally gone from 95% co-op to 95% MDF. And when I say MDF, they're talking about truly discretionary spends. And it has complicated things quite a bit for marketing folks. However, it really is the right thing to do as organizations are driven to take market share. They need partners who are going to do business development with them. So we're just seeing a huge move in this direction, and it affects how you reward, who you reward in particular. We have conversations weekly with organizations that are really trying to define scorecarding and even create automated tools for scorecarding. Because the reality is if you've got this much discretionary funding, not only do you need to know who to give it to, you need to know what the ROI is on the back end of what you've spent, and then you also need to be able to take those dollars and move them forward. And in the next slide, we're going to talk about that a little bit, because you need predictive analytics on when someone sends you a request for $20,000, should you give it to them? Just because they say, I've got a great plan and I need $20,000 to execute this, and I'm going to get 10 new clients, or I'm going to get $500,000 in sales. The people who are making that approval decision really need the metrics to say this has a 75% probability, this has a 50% probability, this has a 95% probability. And for us, that all starts with partner scorecarding.
Yeah, it's a really important question. I think it's a psychological question. You have $1 to allocate to partners, and this may be another subject for another day around tiering and segmentation and allocating those funds. And it goes back to your first slide. where do you make your investment? Do you make your investment at the top end, the people who are performing, and you pour more water on that? Or do you spend your money really on the ones and incentivizing the ones that are really right there on the cusp and can become real superstars? Hey, Tim, what's your... Yeah, go ahead,
Go
Steve.
ahead. No, please, go ahead. I'm sharing the mic here. Go ahead, Tim.
Well, revenue is just a number. It's just a number, and there's a lot of things behind that number that you don't know if that's the only thing you're looking at. One of the big differences between Contra and MDF is that Contra is based on past revenue performance.
Mm-hmm.
Market development funds, like Steve said, is really based on what you believe your partner is going to do for you or with you going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And so based much more on the business plan going forward than on past performance. And, I think Steve indicated that, most tech companies, while not necessarily moving entirely off of Contra, are certainly, allocating a lot more of their marketing dollars, their partner marketing dollars and efforts and incentives to forward-looking, business planning.
Mm-hmm.
Which of my partners are most strategic for what I want to be able to do?
And you have to answer the question, and precisely the reason we're here today is the cloud era, because it's changing the rules of the game. And yesterday's successful partner may not be tomorrow's forward-looking indicator.
Exactly. You may know that you have a cadre of partners out there that have everything ready to pull the trigger to be successful with the cloud. They may not necessarily be your biggest revenue producers, but that's where you want to invest most of your marketing dollars, is with them.
Right. Well, this was great. Thanks, Steve, for sharing some of your own data from your channel survey. Very helpful. I want to just make this one point before I hand it back over to Chris in a second here, but it's not just our own frustration here of us on the call, us who talk about it and the vendors themselves, but all this has clearly an impact on the satisfaction of the partners too. A recent study here from IDC, found a myriad different types of frustrations from the partner's perspective. Too much red tape, the last minute windfall where they're releasing funds just before the end of the quarter, which will not have much of an impact clearly in the quarter. A lot of different changes, the random rebates, the painful examination and the audits on the back end, all creates a certain amount of frustration with the partners as well. So it's important for us to make sure we're keeping them in mind through that. And Chris, before I hand it over to you for the next slide, any other comments that you would add to this on things that you see from the partners?
Well, this goes to one of the core tenets that we talk about a lot at RelayWare, which is the idea of being easy to do business with.
Right.
You want to be the easiest vendor out there for a partner to do business with. And if you look at all these circumstances, what these actually do is they take the idea of incentives and they completely negate them and go in the exact opposite direction. They create a situation where these partners are feeling like, well, they gave us these incentives, but they actually made our lives harder. And
mm-hmm.
At that point, you're kind of throwing your money away at this stage. You've got to be much more in tune with the idea of not just making these incentives effective, but also making them easy for your partners to follow through on, making it easy for them to do the things you want them to do.
Which all comes back to the point earlier around managing on average 8 different relationships, right? So they're going to go to the one that has the least amount of friction and creates the most upside as well. And it's not in this presentation, but I remember seeing earlier this week a slide that talks about from this analyst perspective, the top criteria and choosing partners is ease of business, first, more than anything else. So it is very important. So it's a good reminder. Well, let's do this, Chris. Let's talk about some of reading the tea leaves here of your channel incentive program. And if you see some of these things on this slide, it may be the old, Houston, we have a problem here, because clearly these things are indicators that you may not have an incentive program that can scale with your business and with your success.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense because a lot of times the incentive program is rolled out to cater to specific partners in the channel. It may not be a channel-wide or channel program-wide thing, right? You're targeting certain companies, like Tim said, that are on the verge of being pushed across the goal line into being really great performers. And as a result, the start for managing those incentives might be something simple like a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets are kind of, they're the most widely used business tool, and they're also the most widely misused business tool, unfortunately, because they don't give you all the correlations you need to really track activities and keep a good causal relationship in mind with your incentives. The next step up from that is CRM, customer relationship management. Most companies have that, and many companies think that that's a useful tool to manage your channel partners. It's perhaps better than spreadsheets, but again, it doesn't give you the full visibility of what's going on within the channel, because you're talking about incentives. You're talking about a two-way relationship, right? You're giving money to the partners to do something in return, and CRM doesn't have that ability to track that incoming resulting relationship activity. So CRM is kind of a half measure. It's not quite there. So what ends up happening from there is that companies see that there are holes in their incentive management techniques, and they go out and they look for point solutions, and these end up being siloed. You have siloed systems that don't really talk to each other. They measure part of what's going on, but they don't measure it all in the context of the entire program. So you get information, or you get data, but you don't really get information, if that makes sense. You don't have a good idea of what you're measuring or what you're looking at and how it fits into the more global picture of what's going on. So these three things, be on the lookout for them. If you're managing incentives or parts of your channel programs through these, you may be creating blind spots for yourself that can really hamper your effectiveness across the board.
All right, so now that we know the wrong ways, let's talk about the best practices, if we could. And I think you have 3 or 4 things of the right way, strategies and tactics you can take to do the right thing here. And we'll start here with the first one, going back to the MDF.
Yeah, well,
what's the right way?
Well, the right way to do this is to find a solution that is designed for the problem you're trying to solve. And PRM ends up being that partner relationship management software. It's designed from the ground up to handle situations like what we're talking about, this kind of multi-directional relationship and this correlated view of what's going on. So PRM, because it has links to the financial systems of both vendor and partner, both ends of this relationship, it's much easier to understand cause and effect. Much easier to see how monies are being exchanged and how they're being expended. You can manage accruals and credits automatically through it. It's a much more streamlined way of doing this than looking at a spreadsheet or a CRM application. It works through your vendor partner portal. So it does a lot of the things that we're saying here, funding approvals for funding requests, redemptions of points, etc. It does these things automatically. So it makes it a lot easier on your end. If you're the vendor, you're not doing these things manually. You're not devoting manpower to trying to administer these programs. And it generates reports on the effect of these things. This is really what is I've been talking about here in terms of visibility. You need to understand the effects of what you're doing in order to make those programs more effective and more fruitful in the future. And without the ability to get reporting on what's going on as a result of your efforts, you're kind of working by guess. So the next go around, the incentives for companies are not just at the vendor level or the partner level. It's also important to get down into the individual level for those partners. In other words, you're incenting the people at these companies. You don't pay them. You don't pay their salary. You don't have direct control over them. So how do you get them to do the things you want to do, and how do you get them to sell your products? And so incentives, again, factor in here. But again, it can be a situation where when you're dealing with employees of other people's companies, tracking their activities and understanding what's going on is very difficult unless you have a system that's designed to do that. And PRM automatically tracks these incentive systems. In a lot of cases, they'll have points that are redeemable for cash or prizes or other things. Managing those points from the vendor point of view, again, requires some human intervention unless you have an automatic way of doing that. The ability to not have to have somebody assigned to manage the daily operation of these individual incentives means that not just that you're saving money in terms of labor, but you're also saving hassle in terms of the partner, because the partner's employees don't have to wait for your guy to get on the ball to redeem those points. So it's a much better, much more frictionless way of doing things, as Jim said. The word frictionless is a good way of describing it. Having this stuff in place and using the technology to manage it is much easier than trying to do it manually, and much more effective ultimately. And finally, training. This is kind of the hidden gem here around incentives, and there's lots of ways to incent people to do the training they need to do to be really great partners. You want to have a trained partner ecosystem. How do you get them to spend the time on training? Well, incentives again fits the bill here, but you've got to manage it, because your training program is going to assign accreditations, certifications, and things like that. But you don't want to have somebody again devoted to going over test after test after test and sending out accreditations and certification emails manually. That's just again, it's a slow process for the partner. They don't get the satisfaction they want to get right away, and it's a tough economic sell for you, because you've got to devote somebody to doing this. So having a PRM system in place that can track this stuff and assign credits for these training sessions and award accreditations and certifications automatically makes life better for everybody in the entire relationship.
I'm just going to sneak one more in here just to build on the training incentives here, right? And just talking more about the accreditation. And your point here is that the more training, the better, right? And the manual management, I think, is sort of the headline here, is difficult to do when you're trying to use things like CRM and spreadsheets to manage things like you've talked about here, the training and the individual incentives, correct?
Oh yeah, you can easily manage a situation where you've got a product that requires quite a bit of training, and it's important for the partners to know how to use it. And you've got somebody eager to get on board and start selling your stuff. They go through the training program. They're ready to go. They're ready to talk to their customers, and they can't get an accreditation or certification because your system is too slow and too manual.
Hey, Steve, are you still with us, Steve?
I was just on mute.
Yeah, just a quick question for you. I mean, you come at this from a slightly objective perspective at CCI, and as somebody who lives, eats, breathes this every day. When you look at the PRM systems and what they bring forward as we talk to customers, I mean, are we missing anything that PRM can provide in that journey as the cloud is kind of forcing us to look at the process a little differently?
I think all the points have been touched on well. I think the key is, and even from going all the way back to the very beginning, and I think the best point Chris made all along is with all of these, all of this pull on these partners, they really need to be. The experience is the key. From the very beginning, what the perception is of the partners. I ran an IT company, and I had 7, 8 major vendors. And if I've got X amount of time, and whether you're a Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3 partner in size, doesn't really change, because your marketing capabilities tend to not keep up sometimes with your operational sales capabilities. Yeah. And even that first impact, the front end of a portal even, is tremendously important, because let's face it, partners want to see leads, they want to see what you can do for them, they want to see how many dollars they have, and they want to go back out there and sell. And so tying it all together, I think the package and the messages you guys have around all this is really key. But it starts from the first time that partner lands on that site.
Good. Well, let's do this. Before we go to questions here, let's summarize what we've gone through here and talk about, Chris, the next steps. You know, coming out of this discussion today in this webinar, people are going, we're suggesting they do some things, right? And the first thing here, this first point really, is taking stock of their program. And why don't you talk us through that, if you could, a little bit, what you're suggesting people do?
Right. I always kind of emphasize stepping back and understanding what's going on first before launching into the technology. And I think that's always the best way to sort of chart your course through that. Yeah. And what you need to do is really take an honest and hard look at what your programs are doing right now. Are they successful? Are they not? Are they getting things done according to the behaviors you want from your partners? And taking a step back from that, what is the behavior you want from your partners? Obviously, revenue is your ultimate goal, but what steps do you have to have your partners take to get to revenue? We've outlined a bunch of those training and accreditation and certification and co-marketing and all these different things. But do you understand what that pathway is? Do you understand the priorities you're putting on the elements in that pathway? Once you can do that, going forward, it makes a lot more simple and a lot more direct to make decisions about what you need to do and what you need to look for.
Which leads to this next point, which is making sure that you're looking at the right performance metrics and tracking this. And you look at here, is it revenue, is it loyalty, is it engagement, is it all the above? I mean, we're talking about a different type of journey here than with incentives. So is it all the above, Chris?
Yeah, we all know it's all of the above. And it's all of the above according to some different priorities within your business. But I think also when you get down to brass tacks and the specific metrics, it really is about you and your customers. It always really should be. I think that picking the right metrics really is a competitive advantage. I think a lot of companies like to look up KPIs in a book someplace and try to apply them to their business. That's the lazy way out, really. You have to understand who your customers are, what your business is, and what your priorities are, and look for those metrics versus these kind of generic high altitude metrics that give you an idea of what's going on, but don't really get down into what you should be doing and what you should be changing.
Because once you set those up, right, then it comes down to drawing conclusions and assessing your performance and taking that data, analyzing and saying, what do I need to kill off here on this particular program? Is this program that I put out there working for us? Is it getting the results that we want, right?
Exactly.
And then from there, right, it's taking a look at how that program fits into your overall program. And it's not just your own, Chris, right? It's your competitors, because things are constantly changing in this world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this last square here focuses on things you need to do internally. All these incentives, we tend to think of them as these things that are focused externally out to our partners. But the reality is, in order to do this right, you've got to think about it internally quite a bit too, and understanding how things are changing with what's motivating your partners. Also understanding what your competitors are doing to get their attention, and make regular reviews of how effective incentives are and what can be improved. A regular part of your company DNA. I think a lot of times this becomes a problem. People solve the problem for now, and it's a fire and forget situation, and it only comes back to their attention when there's a problem again. You don't want to do that. That's a missed opportunity.
So clearly, I think just to summarize here, I'm going to open this up to everybody here before we go to questions. The whole point here is that the market has changed. The cloud has kind of changed the dynamics, the commercial economics here. We see it, retail sees it in the showrooming, and if you take that showrooming in the retail business and apply it to the channel ecosystem, it's a very similar dynamic. So you need to look at what you've done, assess what you've done, but also take stock of what you've done in the past. Will those incentives really apply moving forward? And will they continue with the success that you already have? So, Tim, I mean, what's your word of advice here, your words of advice to folks on the phone as we break from this call?
Well, I think, too, first of all, my guess is that most tech companies have too many incentive programs they launch on an annual basis. And how many is too many, I don't know, but too many that are siloed from one another is a bad thing, because I talked with a couple channel chiefs, and they said, I asked them, what is your greatest fear? And they said, my fear is the fear of the unknown. That every new program that we launch, I don't know the impact of that relative to all the other programs that we've launched. And so to look at them in aggregate, and I counsel channel professionals to, put their economics hat on, and they're going to have to really get deeper into financial engineering, because the cloud has made things simpler in some respects for customers. It's made things a lot more complex for tech companies and their channel partners in determining the value that both parties bring and how you incentivize for that value.
Good advice. Chris, I'm going to give you the last word in a second here, but before we do that, Steve, how about you? I mean, what are your words of wisdom and what people should be thinking about leaving this call today?
I like I like what Tim said. The thing that we hear from channel chiefs all the way down, because believe me, that gets translated down, is measurables. And taking, as Tim said, a broad perspective of where those other programs are going as well. And the good news is the programs and the tools from folks like RelayWare, CCI, everybody out there as far as how they're looking at how things get set up are really starting to take those into account because everyone is held accountable today for every dollar that's spent. It's as simple as that.
Great advice. Chris, last word. What are your thoughts?
Well, Steve mentioning measurables is something people should take to heart because I think that's the key here. I think a lot of programs don't have the responsiveness they need. They can't adjust quickly to changes, or they can't adjust to the program itself being flawed from the get-go because they don't have those measurables. They don't have that visibility. And the secret here is not to go out there and never make a mistake. The secret is to realize when you're making a mistake and to change that to get the most out of the program. You don't need to ride a series of incentive programs that aren't working into the ground. That's not necessary anymore. That's not, obviously it's not a good thing, but it's not necessary even. You don't have to do it. You can change on the fly if you understand what you're changing to. And I think that using the technology to get visibility around the entirety of what's going on is key to that because, as Tim said, if you try to do these things and without having an understanding of the relationship between them, there are unintended consequences, and one of those is just not being as successful as you think you can be.
Great. Well, if you liked what you've heard today, there's more information available on this. You can download the white paper on this topic. It's at our website, relayware.com/motivatechannelpartners with hyphens in between there. You can also join the conversation on Twitter or just email us some direct questions at the address below there. And actually, I want to put a plug here for a webinar next week that Steve, you and CCI are doing on incentivization. Is that correct?
Yes, we are going to be. We tend to do two different kinds of webinars. One is forward thinking, kind of cutting edge, where direction things are going. But then we also do some really solid educational pieces on something as straightforward as, hey, here are the 8 key principles to managing a successful MDF program. And that's what next week's really going to be about. Maybe a little bit of blend of both.
And I think we're going to reciprocate and have one of our folks as a guest speaker on yours, and I think Tim may be joining you as well next week. So more information presumably can be found on your website for that.
Absolutely.
So I think we have some time here for some questions. I'm going to see if Karen, if you're still there and online. You could unmute your line, Karen.
Hi, Jim. Everybody should be now unmuted. So if, just for the sake of noise feedback, if you're not going to speak, it'd be great for you just to mute yourselves. But I've got a few more questions here that have come through during the webinar, but I'll open it up to the floor first and see if we've got any burning questions.
Okay, any from our listeners out there, any questions that you all have for us? Okay, let's start then, Karen, with one of the questions that you got during the actual webinar, if we could.
Yeah, yes, please. The first one was, what's the difference between co-op and MDF funds?
The difference, yeah, actually, Steve, you touched on that earlier in one of your slides. You talked about the reallocation and the shifting between co-op and MDF. Could you maybe explain what the difference is between the two of those?
Sure. So MDF is Market Development Fund. It is generally a discretionary based incentive, where co-op is going to be a cooperative agreement between the vendor and the partner to do mostly around advertising, traditional advertising. Okay. And it's going to be accrual-based. It does get blended. For instance, some organizations allocate their MDF based on a previous year's sales. So you're taking that accrual-based dollar and then allowing the partners to submit for market development activities.
Okay. All right. Great.
Thank you. Actually, Steve, that might lead into another question which might come your way. And it says, this listener wants to know, which is better in your opinion, MDF or co-op, especially when you offer a cloud-based solution?
So as a managed service provider and having run an IT company, I loved MDF because my goal was not to take dollars coming from an organization and run those to my bottom line. My goal was to take $50,000 and turn it into $500,000 in sales. I really, as a personal growth-oriented partner, that's what I'm looking for. And it's a great way to find out who really is on board with growth and who really is a lifestyle. However, there's absolute place for co-op, and when the programs are run well and it's not an entitlement, but it really is there as a joint effort to continue to market, it can be very, very strong. I think there's a blend that has to go there, and it depends, I think Chris said it, really looking at the metrics of who your partners are and understanding who they are. In the cloud-based side of these guys, a lot of them are looking to grow, and they're going to want to do those seminars. They're going to want to do those true market development activities, and I just think that's a great direction to go, but I have to admit I'm a little biased.
Thanks for that, Steve. We do have time a bit for one more, but this one says, have you seen problems with incentive payoff accuracy?
Could you ask that again? I'm not sure I heard you all the way.
Yeah, have you seen problems with incentive payoff accuracy?
Yeah, Steve, I don't know if you've seen this. I certainly did, where, just by, let me back up. When I joined Forrester 6 years ago, I was shocked at how much channel management was dependent upon spreadsheets in the tech industry. So tech industry, over $1 trillion of revenue generated worldwide, over 2/3 of that through the channel. So, 2/3 of $1 trillion, pretty big number. A lot of that flowing through spreadsheets or being managed by spreadsheets. It's kind of scary. And I've heard, actual horror stories of incentive payouts where the tech company pays out way more than what they should have or way less. Both are pretty bad for different reasons. Have you seen that, Steve?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there's a great white paper out there. There's a guy named Rob Hand. He works for SAP now, but has been in the channel for a long time. And it's an older paper, but I think it still reads exceptionally true. And the ROI is around 16 to 20% that you can expect moving from spreadsheets to automated systems. And this is on back-end accuracy of payments and eliminating mistakes. And that's before you get to anything on the motivational side on the front end, and the peace of mind and the effectiveness of the administrators that are actually running the program. So there's some real hard data out there on that.
Well, I think we should probably wrap up here, Karen, and I think we're a little over the hour right now, if we could. And I'd like to thank all of our presenters today and also thank everybody who joined us today, all of you. We will make this available tomorrow on demand from our website, and we'll follow up to each of you with an email so you have a link to that, as well as a link to the white paper as well. So unless there's anything else, any other comments before we break? Thank you all very much, and appreciate you joining, and stay tuned for more webinars coming down the road from RelayWare and other partners like CCI. Thank you all very much.